Get out! Get out of my house, Jade! Now! My father's roar sliced through the already tension-filled air, colder and sharper than the howling Chicago wind outside. His face, usually a mask of composed legal gravitas, was contorted with a fury I'd rarely seen directed at me, though it was a familiar sight when Leo, my younger brother, was throwing one of his infamous tantrums. But this wasn't about Leo's latest spoiled outrage. This was about me and the missing money. "But Dad, I swear I didn't take it. Why would I pleaded, my voice thin and cracking, struggling to be heard over the rising crescendo of my mother's muffled sobs. Eleanor, my mother was curled on the pristine leather sofa, her face buried in her hands, a silent, complicit judge. Arthur Sterling, my esteemed lawyer father, was not known for his patience, especially when his impeccable image was at stake. And right now, according to him, I was a glaring smudge on that polished veneer. "Don't you dare lie to me. Young lady, $2,500. Jade, $2,500 for the Sterling Charity Gala deposit gone. And Leo saw you near my study this afternoon pacing, looking shifty. What do you have to say for yourself?" His accusation hung in the opulent living room, heavy and suffocating like the expensive velvet drapes. The fire crackled merrily in the grand stone fireplace, an ironic warmth against the glacial atmosphere. "Shifty. I was looking for a book, Dad. A book. Leo is lying. He's always..." "Enough." My father slammed his fist on the antique mahogany table, making the ornate porcelain vase jump. "Your brother would never lie about something like this. He's a good boy, a diligent student, a future leader. Unlike you with your rebellious streaks, your constant questioning your attitude." He spat the last word like a venomous insult. The implication was clear. Leo was the golden child, the inheritor of the Sterling legacy. I was the anomaly, the inconvenient truth. My eyes darted to Leo, who stood by the staircase, a picture of innocent betrayal. He was 16, 2 years my junior, with a boyish charm that hid a calculating mind. His bright blue eyes, so like my father's, met mine for a fleeting second, a triumphant, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips before he quickly adopted a look of wide-eyed concern. That smirk. It was the spark that ignited the bonfire of my rage. He knew. He absolutely knew. "Leo, tell them," I implored, my voice now laced with a desperate edge. "Tell them it wasn't me. Tell them you're wrong." He sniffled a perfectly timed, soft little sound. I just saw her dad. I didn't want to say anything, but the money's gone, and she was there. I just thought..." His voice trailed off a masterclass in feigned regret. He looked exactly like a scared, honest little brother who had just delivered an uncomfortable truth. My parents ate it up hook, line, and sinker. My mother, Eleanor, finally lifted her head, her artist's eyes, usually so gentle and expressive, now hollow and distant. "Jade, darling, why would you do this? We've given you everything." Her voice was soft, mournful, more disappointed than angry, which somehow stung more than my father's outright fury. It was the sound of a mother who had already judged and condemned her own daughter. "Everything..." I scoffed, a bitter laugh bubbling up from my throat. "You've given Leo everything. You've given him a free pass for every stunt he's ever pulled. And me? I'm just the convenient scapegoat, aren't? The difficult one, the one who asks too many questions, the one who doesn't fit into your perfectly manicured world." My voice rose raw with years of suppressed resentment. "This is a setup, Dad." Leo framed me. My father's face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. "Don't you dare accuse your brother. He is a credit to this family. You, on the other hand, are a disgrace, a thief, and a liar. I won't have it. Not under my roof." He pointed a rigid finger towards the grand oak front door, which now seemed to loom like the gates of hell. "Pack a bag. You have 10 minutes. Then you leave. For good." The words hung in the air, echoing the frigid December wind rattling the window panes. 10 minutes. For good. My world, built on the shaky foundations of conditional love and constant comparison, was not just crumbling. It was shattering into a million irreparable pieces. The warmth of the fireplace, the opulence of the room, the familiar faces of my family, all of it suddenly felt alien hostile. They were choosing him. Always him. And in that moment, as the first angry tear traced a scorching path down my cheek, a seed of something cold. 10 minutes. That was all the time Arthur Sterling deemed my 18 years of existence worth. I stormed up the grand staircase, my boots thudding against the plush carpet, a sound like a ticking clock. I didn't head for my room immediately. I stopped at the landing and looked at the gallery of family portraits lining the hallway. There we were, the perfect Sterlings. My father in his silk power tie, my mother with her serene, distant smile, and Leo always. Leo standing front and center, clutching some trophy or another. And there I was, shoved to the side, my smile forced my eyes already reflecting the soul-crushing realization that I was merely a background character in the Leo show. This wasn't the first time Leo had played the victim while wielding the knife. When he was 14 and I was 16, he'd accidentally smashed my mother's favorite hand-blown glass sculpture, a piece worth more than most people's cars. He didn't even blink before telling Mom he saw me practicing my aggressive modern dance moves in the living room. I didn't even take dance, yet I was the one grounded for a month. My phone confiscated, my apologies dismissed as gaslighting. Then there was the time he failed his chemistry midterm. To avoid my father's wrath, he swapped our graded papers since we shared the same last name and a similar scrawl, and convinced Dad that I was the one struggling while he was the overachiever helping me. When I pointed out the obvious discrepancies, Dad had simply looked at me with that tired, disappointed expression. "Jade, don't be bitter, just because Leo has a natural aptitude for the sciences," he'd said. "Accept your shortcomings and learn from your brother's work ethic." His work ethic. Leo's only work ethic was his mastery of manipulation. He was a predator in a private school blazer, and our parents were his most willing prey. I shoved my door open, the wood hitting the stopper with a satisfying thwack. My room was the only place in this mausoleum of a house that felt like mine. It was filled with books on forensic psychology and gritty urban photography, things my mother called unbecoming of a young lady. I grabbed my weathered North Face duffel bag from the closet and started throwing things in. Not the expensive cashmere sweaters Eleanor bought to make me look soft, but my heavy flannels, my worn-in jeans, and my Doc Martens. My hands were shaking, not with fear, but with a volcanic, bubbling rage. I could hear them downstairs. My father was already talking about damage control for the gala, and my mother was likely pouring herself a stiff gin and tonic to calm her nerves. Neither of them was coming upstairs to stop me. Neither of them was questioning the word of their precious 16-year-old saint. "Need a hand, sis." I spun around. Leo was leaning against my doorframe, his hands shoved deep into his designer jogger pockets. The concerned brother mask was gone. In its place was a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. "You're a sociopath, Leo," I hissed, shoving a bundle of socks into the bag. $2,500. Really? What did you do with it? Buy more crypto? Pay off your gambling debts from those underground poker games you think I don't know about?" Leo chuckled a low, chilling sound. He stepped into the room, closing the door softly behind him. "It doesn't matter what I did with it, Jade. What matters is that Dad believes you took it. And why wouldn't he? You're the one always complaining about needing money to move out. You're the one who hates their stifling lifestyle. It's the perfect narrative." "I'll kill you." I whispered the words, vibrating with a dark, honest intent. "No, you won't." He smirked, checking his gold watch, a gift for his 16th birthday that cost more than the stolen deposit. "You'll leave, you'll struggle, and eventually You'll come crawling back to beg for forgiveness for a crime you didn't commit. And I'll be here, the magnanimous brother, telling Dad to give you a second chance. I own this house, Jade. I own them. You're just a glitch. I lunged toward him, my hands clawing for his neck, but he stepped aside with practiced grace, his eyes gleaming with vicious delight. Careful, Jade. If you leave a bruise, Dad will phone the police for domestic assault. Do you really want thief and attacker on your file before you even reach the sidewalk? I froze, my chest heaving, my pulse slamming against my ribs like a caged bird. He was right. In the Sterling court of law, I was already sentenced. Physical retaliation was exactly what they expected from the unstable daughter. Get out, I said, my voice lethally calm. Gladly. It's beginning to stink like homeless in here. He winked and strolled out, humming a cheerful tune. I zipped the bag closed. I didn't take much, only the essentials and my camera. As I passed my desk, I spotted the silver locket my grandmother had given me before she passed. She was the only one who ever saw through Leo's mask. Don't let them extinguish your fire, Jade, she had murmured. Leo thought he had erased me. He was wrong. He had only given me a reason to burn his world down. The transition from the climate-controlled sanctuary of the Sterling estate to the raw reality of a Chicago winter was like being doused in liquid nitrogen. The infamous Chicago hawk wind sliced through my denim jacket as if it were tissue paper. I hadn't grabbed a proper coat in my fury, and now the sub-zero temperature was a physical blow, reminding me with every shiver that I was no longer protected by the Sterling name. I walked for hours. My combat boots, once a fashion statement at the academy, were now just failing shields against 6 inches of gray chemical slush. By midnight, the grand Victorian houses of my youth had faded into the industrial skeleton of the city's outskirts. My phone buzzed. For a split second, a flicker of hope ignited. Was it my mother? Had she finally found her spine? No, it was a group chat notification. Did you hear about Jade? Leo said she stole the gala money and had a breakdown. Psycho behavior. Total freak. I always knew she was a ticking time bomb. I watched the blue bubbles pop up, each one a tiny needle pricking my heart. My friends, people I'd shared 1,000 lattes with, didn't ask for my side. They just swallowed Leo's poison and asked for seconds. I didn't delete the thread. I saved it. I wanted to remember every name of every person who turned their back on me while I was still within earshot of their judgment. I powered the phone off at 34%. In this world, a dead phone was a death sentence. I ended up at Union Station. It was a cathedral of the forgotten smelling of damp wool, burnt coffee, and desperation. I found a corner near a radiator that was barely lukewarm and huddled there, clutching my duffel bag like a shield. First night, the voice came from a bundle of rags nearby. An older woman with eyes as sharp as a hawk's peeked from under a grimy beanie. Is it that obvious? I rasped. The bag is too nice. And you've got that look, the one where you still think you're a person with a place to go, she said, coughing into a tattered sleeve. I'm Martha. Jade, I replied shortly. I wasn't looking for a friend. I was looking for a way to stay alive until I could make them bleed. Well, Jade, here's a tip. Sleep with your bag strap wrapped around your leg and keep your anger tucked inside. Out here, anger makes you reckless. Reckless gets you killed. I didn't sleep. Every time I drifted off, I saw Leo's triumphant smirk. I felt the weight of my father's hand slamming the table. I replayed the scene of the stolen $2,500 over and over. I had spent 18 years trying to be better than the mess they thought I was, only to realize that being good was my greatest liability. By 4 a.m., security cleared the station. I was shoved back out into the pre-dawn darkness. I found a 24-hour diner. I ordered the cheapest black coffee and sat by the window watching the city wake up. The commuters began to trickle in, businessmen in suits that smelled like my father's cologne. I took out my camera, a high-end Leica. It was worth $4,000. Selling it would buy me a month in a motel. But as I gripped the cold metal, I realized it was the only weapon I had left. It was the only thing that saw the world the way I did, unfiltered, honest, and cruel. "You look like you're planning a murder, honey," the waitress said, refilling my cup. Her name tag read Cora. I looked up, my eyes hard. "Not a murder, a reckoning." Cora shrugged. "As long as you pay, you can reckon all you want. I'll bring some toast. On the house." "I don't need charity," I snapped, my sterling pride rearing its ugly head. Cora leaned over the counter. "Listen, kid, you're in the cold with a bag and a camera. You don't have the luxury of pride anymore. Take the damn toast, stay warm, and get smart. The world doesn't care if you're angry. It only cares if you're standing." She walked away. I looked at the steam rising from the cup. She was right. Pride was for people with addresses. I took a sip of the bitter liquid and felt it burn. Leo thought he had thrown me into the trash. He didn't realize that I was the kind of fire that thrived on the wind. I pulled out a notebook and wrote 3 names: Leo, Arthur, Eleanor. I stared at them until the ink blew to the stomach. 3 days after being exiled, my world had shrunk to the size of a cheap deli sandwich and the metallic rusted scent of the L train stations. The Chicago cold had seeped into my marrow, but the frost radiating from the people I used to call family was far more lethal. I decided to go to my Aunt Sarah. She was my mother's younger sister, a bohemian artist who lived in a sun-drenched loft in Wicker Park. She was the one who sent me photography books and told me to never let the sterling suit and tie drones crush your spirit. If anyone in this godforsaken city would listen to me, it was her. I stood outside her brick building, my breath hitching in white clouds, and pressed the buzzer. When the door opened, the scent of lavender and expensive oil paint drifted out, a smell that usually meant safety, but Sarah's face told a different story. She stood in the doorway blocking the entrance. "Jade," she breathed, but there was no hug. Her eyes were darting nervously toward the street. "God, you look rough." "Aunt Sarah, please. I just need a shower and a chance to explain. Leo set me up. He stole that money too." "I know the story, Jade. Arthur called everyone." She interrupted, her voice stripped of its usual warmth and replaced by a jagged lawyer-approved caution. "He said you took the charity gala deposit. He told us you're having a manic episode and that anyone who helps you is only enabling your self-destruction." "And you believed him?" I hissed, the rage bubbling up again. "You've seen Leo's act for years. You know he's a manipulative little sociopath." Sarah sighed, looking anywhere but at my eyes. "Jade, your father is a powerful man. He has witnesses, bank records, and Leo's honest testimony. And you've always been the difficult one. I'm sorry, but I can't let you stay. If Arthur finds out I'm helping you, he'll pull his funding for my gallery exhibition next month." I have a career to think about, Jade." I stared at her. This woman who preached about artistic integrity and living your truth was trembling at the thought of losing my father's checkbook. The betrayal felt like a physical, "So that's it? You're choosing his blood money over your own niece?" I asked. My voice had gone flat cold and dangerously steady. "I'll give you $100 for a motel, but you have to go. Now," she said, frantically digging into her designer purse and thrusting a few crumpled bills at me like I was a leper. I didn't take the money. I turned and walked away, ignoring her weak, guilt-ridden calls after me. I headed to a public library, one of the last places a person with no home could sit without being harassed. I needed to know what Leo was really doing. I logged into a burner social media account and began scrubbing through the profiles of Leo's prep school elite circle. And then I saw it. A post from 3 hours ago by Brian Leo's best friend. They were at an underground members-only lounge in the Gold Coast. In the background of the blurry photo, Leo was laughing, a glass of expensive bourbon in one hand, but it was his other hand that caught my eye. Pinned to his wrist was a brand new Patek Philippe watch, a limited edition worth at least 20 grand. My heart hammered against my ribs. That watch cost 10 times the amount of the stolen deposit. Leo hadn't just framed me for a measly $2,500. He was involved in something much bigger. The gala money was likely just a drop in the bucket to cover a gambling debt or a down payment for his high-end lifestyle. I took out my Leica and snapped a photo of the computer screen. A plan began to crystallize in the freezing darkness of my mind. My father was obsessed with integrity and legacy. If I could prove his golden boy was actually a high-stakes thief and a fraud, his precious sterling reputation would go up in flames. That night, I returned to Union Station. I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I sat on the dirty floor, pulled out my notebook, and drew a thick black line through Sarah's name. I moved her from the Allies column to the casualties list. The hunger was still there, and the cold was biting, but the fury had evolved into a sharp surgical focus. Leo thought he had 2 weeks into my exile, I was no longer Jade Sterling, the girl with the glowing skin and hair that smelled like expensive salon shampoo. I had lost 12 pounds, my eyes were hollowed out from a chronic lack of sleep, and my heart had turned into a jagged piece of flint. I had learned how to shower in the cramped stalls of a 24-hour gym, and how to make a single cup of black coffee last 4 hours in a heated lobby. I knew exactly where my father would be on a Friday afternoon. The Union League Club of Chicago. It was the temple of old money, where powerful men went to disappear behind mahogany doors to trade favors and smoke cigars that cost more than my monthly food budget. I stood across the street, watching his black SUV glide to a stop at the curb. Arthur stepped out, his charcoal suit tailored to such perfection it looked like armor. Behind him was my mother, Eleanor. She looked hauntingly beautiful in her mink coat, her eyes carrying that familiar vacuous sadness she used to drown out reality. I crossed the street. The doormen looked at me like I was a piece of trash that needed to be swept away, but as I got closer, the flicker of recognition hit them. They froze. Jade. My father stopped dead in his tracks. His voice dropped an octave, dripping with more disgust than concern. What the hell are you doing here? Look at yourself. You look like a common vagrant. Arthur! Oh my God, Jade! My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She looked at my frayed denim and my sunken cheeks, but she didn't take a single step toward me. She stayed anchored to his side. I'm not here for your money, Dad, I said, my voice raspy but steady, ringing out across the quiet, dignified entrance. Heads began to turn. The elite of Chicago were watching. I'm here to give you one last chance. Let's talk about evaluations, I said, stepping into his personal space. I could smell his expensive cologne, the scent of my childhood now smelling like betrayal. Why don't you ask Leo about the Patek Philippe on his wrist? Why don't you ask him about his late nights on the Gold Coast with Brian's crew? That $2,500 was pocket change compared to what he's actually doing, Dad. My father's face shifted for a split second, a micro-expression of doubt, but he smothered it instantly with a mask of icy composure. Leo is a good boy. He's under immense pressure because of your episodes. Don't you dare try to drag your brother into the gutter with you. Are you really that blind? I snarled. Or are you just too terrified to admit that your precious legacy is a common criminal? That's enough, my father barked. He signaled to 2 burly security guards. Get her out of here. And if she shows up near this club or my home again, call the police and report her for harassment. My mother looked at me, a single tear tracking through her perfect foundation, but she remained silent as the guards reached for my arms. Don't touch me. I shoved their hands away, standing tall and looking my father straight in the eye. You want to protect the sterling name that badly? Then get ready, because when I'm done, that name won't be worth the paper it's printed on. Jade, please stop this before you ruin yourself completely, my mother whispered, her voice trembling. I looked at her, and the last shred of my affection died right then and there. You ruined me the night you stood by and watched him throw me out, Eleanor. Stop pretending you're a mother. I turned and walked away before the guards could escort me. I could feel my father's eyes boring into my back, not with regret, but with the cold fear of a man who realized his secrets were no longer safe. He knew I wasn't lying. He knew Leo was a disaster waiting to happen, but he would rather sacrifice his daughter than let the world see a crack in his perfect family portrait. I walked into the fading Chicago twilight. I had no home, no bed, and no family left, but I had gained something far more powerful, the certainty that they would protect Leo until the very end, which meant I had to burn down the entire house to get to him. I pulled my Leica out of my bag. I had caught it, the perfect shot of Arthur Sterling sneering at his homeless daughter in front of the city's most prestigious club. The wind off Lake Michigan felt like 1,000 jagged needles against my skin, but I didn't move. I was perched on the rusted fire escape of a crumbling brick building across from the Velvet Room, an unlicensed high-stakes gambling den disguised as a private cigar lounge. This was where the golden boys of the North Shore came to play man-sized games with their father's money. I had been trailing Leo for 3 straight nights. I'd traded my last $20 to a dishwasher just to get the schedule for the back alley entrance. My Leica was pressed to my eye, the long lens acting as my scout in the shadows. Around 2 a.m., the heavy steel door creaked open, groaning like a tired beast. Leo stepped out looking completely disheveled. His $1,000 wool coat was unbuttoned, and his stride was loathsome and loopy. He wasn't alone. Brian, his shadow and enabler, followed him out, looking equally panicked. I told you not to double down, Leo. Brian hissed, his voice echoing sharply in the narrow alley. That was 50 grand. 50. Where the hell are you going to get that kind of cash before Monday morning? Leo slammed his fist against the brick wall, a dull, thudding sound of pure, frustrated entitlement. Shut up, Brian. I'll figure it out. I always do. You already drained the charity fund deposit, and you let your dad throw Jade out for it. But this is different. These guys aren't your father. They'll break your legs, or worse. I felt a surge of cold, electric triumph. I adjusted the settings on my camera and hit the record button. My high-gain microphone was a masterpiece. In the silence of the alley, their voices were terrifyingly clear. Jade was a gift, Leo sneered, leaning against a grime-covered dumpster, a cigarette shaking between his fingers. She was the perfect scapegoat. Dad already hated her rebellious phase. All I had to do was slip the empty envelope into her camera bag and look devastated. He was so happy to finally have a reason to get rid of her that he didn't even check the security footage from the study. He just deleted it because I told him the system malfunctioned while she was in there. You actually deleted the footage? Brian asked, sounding impressed despite his terror. Of course I did. I'm the only one in that house who understands tech. Dad trusts me blindly. He wants to believe I'm the perfect heir so badly that he'd ignore a murder if I told him it was for the family's sake. Leo let out a dark, jagged laugh. The look on her face when he kicked her out. Man, that was better than winning at the tables. She actually thought she could explain herself. I held my breath, my finger steady on the shutter. My heart was pounding. But the 50 grand, Leo, Brian pressed. The Russian guys, they're coming on Monday. I'll pull it from the firm's escrow account, Leo said casually, as if he were talking about grabbing a candy bar from a convenience store. Dad is the senior partner. I have his remote login. I'll move the money, scrub the trail, and by the time the audit happens in 6 months, I'll have won it back and replaced it. Or better yet, I'll find a way to blame it on some disgruntled paralegal. It's easy when people want to believe you're the hero. They began to walk toward the end of the alley where a valet-parked Porsche was waiting. I kept filming until the red taillights disappeared into the thick Chicago fog. I sat back on the cold metal slats of the fire escape, my hands finally starting to shake. I had spent 18 years wondering why I wasn't enough. Now I knew. It wasn't that I was bad. It was that Leo was a monster, and my parents were his architects. I looked at the small digital screen. I had Leo's face illuminated by the orange glow of his cigarette, admitting to every lie and every theft. "You're not a hero, Leo," I whispered into the dark. "You're a ghost, and I'm the one who's going to haunt you." I didn't go back to the station that night. I used the last of my battery to back up the file to an encrypted cloud drive. I was freezing, starving, and exhausted, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a fire in my chest. I didn't sneak onto the Sterling estate through the service entrance like a disgraced daughter. I walked through the front gate, blending into the high-stakes choreography of caterers and florists, preparing for the rescheduled Sterling Charity Gala. The irony was a bitter, metallic taste in my mouth. The very event used to justify my exile was now the stage for my return. I was a shadow moving among the vibrant blooms of expensive white lilies. I had spent my final $40 at a thrift store on a floor-length black silk dress, minimalist and morning dark. I had washed my hair in the cold sink of a Starbucks and pinned it back so tightly my cheekbones looked like razors. I didn't look like a vagrant anymore. I looked like a ghost that had crawled out of the Chicago slush to collect a blood debt. I bypassed the bustling kitchen and slipped into my father's study. The air in there smelled of old paper and the kind of arrogance that only comes with generations of unchecked power. I moved to his mahogany desk, the altar, where he had judged and condemned me, and plugged a small encrypted USB drive into his workstation. My fingers didn't tremble. My nerves had been cauterized by the frost weeks ago. "What are you doing here?" The voice was a whip crack. I turned slowly. My mother, Eleanor, stood in the doorway, draped in a gown that cost more than a mid-sized sedan. She looked at me with raw horror. "You need to leave Jade, now, before your father sees you," she hissed. "He'll do what Eleanor disowned me twice," I asked, my voice flat. "I'm just here to drop off a gift for the gala. A little video presentation to liven up the evening." "You look hollow," she whispered, her eyes welling with easy tears. "Please, just take this." She reached into her clutch and pulled out a thick stack of $100 bills. "Take it and find a hotel. I'll try to talk to him when the guests leave." I walked toward her, and for the first time, she was the one who flinched. I took the money and let it flutter to the floor like dead leaves. "You're still trying to buy a clean conscience. You didn't talk to him the night he disowned me. Don't start pretending you have a voice now." "Jade, please. The video starts in 20 minutes, Eleanor. If you want to save what's left of your perfect family, I suggest you find Leo and tell him to start running." I brushed past her and headed for the mezzanine balcony overlooking the grand ballroom. Below, the who's who of Chicago were sipping champagne and praising Arthur Sterling for his fortitude. I watched my father take the stage, his silver hair gleaming under the chandeliers. Leo stood just behind him, the loyal prince wearing a brand new Patek Philippe that caught the light with every fake smile. "Tonight is about integrity," Arthur began, his voice booming through the speakers. "It's about the values that define the Sterling legacy." I watched Leo. He looked invincible. He didn't see me in the dark above him, my thumb hovering over the execute command on my phone. "I'd like to share a film about our foundation's work," Arthur said. The lights dimmed. I tapped the screen. The projector whirred, but it didn't show charity work. Instead, Leo's face, illuminated by a cigarette in a grimy alley, filled the screen. His voice tore through the ballroom like a chainsaw. Jade was a gift. She was the perfect scapegoat. Dad trusts me blindly. He'd ignore a murder if I told him it was for the family's sake. The silence was a vacuum. The ballroom, once a temple of calculated elegance, had transformed into a pit of sharks. The silence that followed the video didn't last. It was replaced by a low, rhythmic thrum of whispers that quickly escalated into a roar of scandal. This was the elite of Chicago. They didn't offer sympathy. They fed on the weakness of their own. "Leo, what is this?" Arthur's voice wasn't a roar this time. It was a strangled, hollow sound, the noise of a man watching his reflection shatter in 1,000 directions. Leo didn't answer. He couldn't. He stood frozen, his eyes darting toward the exits, the Patek Philippe on his wrist, now looking like a shackle rather than a trophy. He looked like exactly what he was, a panicked boy who had run out of lies. I descended the grand staircase slowly, my black silk dress trailing behind me like a funeral shroud. The crowd parted for me, their eyes wide with a mix of horror and morbid fascination. I wasn't the troubled daughter anymore. I was the evidence. "It's the truth, Arthur," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. "I didn't call him Dad. That privilege had died in the Chicago slush. The integrity you were just bragging about, it's right there on the screen. Or is your blind trust still more important than the facts?" Arthur turned to me, his face a mask of agony. "Jade, I didn't know." "You didn't want to know," I corrected, stopping at the base of the stairs. "You wanted a legacy, and you were willing to sacrifice me to keep the illusion of one. You threw me out into a sub-zero night for a crime your golden boy committed to fund his gambling addiction." Suddenly, the heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. 4 men in dark suits entered, their movements synchronized and professional. One of them held up a badge. "Arthur Sterling, we're with the Financial Crimes Division. We have a warrant for the seizure of the Sterling law firm's escrow records and an arrest warrant for Leo Sterling in connection with wire fraud and grand larceny." The room gasped as if on cue. My father, the man who lived for the law, looked like he had been struck by lightning. Leo finally broke. He tried to bolt toward the service entrance, but the officers were faster. They tackled him near a table of hors d'oeuvres, the silver platters crashing to the floor in a symphony of expensive wreckage. "Dad, do something, help me!" Leo screamed. His face pressed against the polished marble floor. "It was just a loan. I was going to put it back." Eleanor let out a piercing cry and collapsed into a chair, her diamonds sparkling mockingly in the bright gala light. I walked over to where Leo was being handcuffed. I knelt down so my face was level with his. The smug sociopath was gone, replaced by a sobbing, terrified child. "You said you deleted me, Leo," I whispered loud enough only for him to hear. "But you forgot one thing. I'm a photographer. I'm trained to see what people want to hide. And I never miss the shot." I stood up and looked at my father. He looked aged, his shoulders slumped, the power draining out of him with every camera flash from the guests who were now recording the scene on their phones. "You wanted to protect the family honor, Arthur," I said, gesturing to the chaos. "How does it look now? Was it worth it? He didn't answer. He couldn't look me in the eye. The police led Leo away, his designer shoes scuffing against the floor. As they passed the exit, I felt a strange sensation. It wasn't joy. It wasn't the happy ending from a movie. It was the cold, hard satisfaction of a surgeon removing a tumor. It was painful. It was messy. But it was finally out. I walked past my mother, past the ruins of the Sterling Charity Gala, and toward the front door. "Jade? Wait!" Arthur called out, his voice cracking. "Where are you going? We need to fix this." I paused at the threshold, the cold Chicago air already rushing in to meet me. "There is no we, Arthur. You made sure of that. I'm going to find a life that doesn't require a confession to be." The following week felt like a slow-motion car crash that the entire city of Chicago couldn't stop watching. The Sterling name, once synonymous with old money prestige and untouchable legal power, was being dragged through the mud of every tabloid and news cycle. I sat in a small, cramped apartment I'd rented with the money I earned, selling the exclusive behind-the-scenes photos of the gala to a national news syndicate. The irony wasn't lost on me. The Sterlings had finally funded my independence, just not in the way they'd planned. On the television, a grim-faced reporter stood outside the Cook County Jail. "Leo Sterling, the 16-year-old son of prominent attorney Arthur Sterling, remains in custody. Sources say the evidence provided by an anonymous whistleblower, now confirmed to be his older sister Jade, details a sophisticated web of wire fraud and theft from his father's own firm to cover high-stakes gambling debts." I watched the footage of Leo being led into court. He looked small. Without the designer suits and the shield of our father's reputation, he was just a scared kid who had played a man's game and lost. His golden boy aura had evaporated, replaced by the gray pallor of a prison jumpsuit. But the fall didn't stop with Leo. Arthur's firm was under federal investigation. Clients were fleeing like rats from a sinking ship. No one wanted to be represented by a man who couldn't even manage his own household, let alone a multi-million-dollar escrow account. I heard through the grapevine that the board had asked for his resignation. The king had been dethroned by the very legacy he tried to protect. Then there was Aunt Sarah. She called me dozens of times, her voice frantic and tearful on the voicemails. "Jade, honey, please. The gallery pulled my show. They heard I was associated with the scandal. I didn't mean those things I said. I was just scared of Arthur." I deleted every single message. Silence was the only language she deserved. My mother, Eleanor, fared no better. I received a letter from her hand, written on her expensive stationery, though the ink was smudged by tears. She talked about starting over and healing as a family. She asked if we could meet for tea. I burned the letter in a glass bowl. You don't get to ask for tea after you watch your child starve in the cold. One afternoon, a courier arrived at my door with a legal document. It was a formal apology from Arthur's legal team, along with an offer of a massive settlement if I signed a non-disclosure agreement. They wanted to bury the story before the trial. I laughed, a sharp, jagged sound that filled the quiet room. I picked up my Leica and took a photo of the settlement offer. I didn't sign it. Instead, I sent a copy to the district attorney with a note, "The truth isn't for sale." Leo thought he had deleted me. My father thought he could manage me. But as I looked at the headlines of their downfall, I realized the Chicago winter was finally losing its grip. The ice on the lake was cracking, echoing the sound of the Sterling name as it shattered into obscurity. I stood on the platform of Union Station, the same place where I had once huddled for warmth, clutching my bag like a shield. But today, I wasn't a runaway. I was a traveler. Leo's trial had ended a week ago. He was sentenced to a juvenile detention center, followed by a long probation, his bright future, now a permanent record of felony fraud. My father, Arthur, had been forced into early retirement, his law license suspended. He had moved to a small cottage in a different state, far from the whispers of the Gold Coast. My mother followed him, a ghost of her former self, still trying to paint over the cracks of a ruined life. They had reached out one last time, a desperate plea for a family dinner, to move past the misunderstandings. I didn't even respond. Some things can't be fixed with a dinner. Some wounds are meant to be scars, reminding you of the strength it took to heal. I looked down at the new duffel bag at my feet. It was packed with the same flannels and combat boots, but also with several rolls of high-quality film and a letter of acceptance from a prestigious photojournalism program in New York. I had paid for the first year in full with the money from my gala photos, money earned from the very moment they tried to destroy me. Platform 5, the 10:15 to New York is now boarding, the overhead voice announced. I picked up my camera, the Leica that had been my only witness in the dark. I looked at it for a moment, remembering Martha at the station, Cora at the diner, and even the cold stinging of the wind. They had been my real teachers. They taught me that blood doesn't make a family. Loyalty and truth do. And if you don't have those, you're just strangers sharing a last name. I felt a presence beside me. I turned to see a young girl, maybe 16, looking lost and clutching a small backpack. She looked exactly the way I did 3 months ago, scared, angry, and alone. "Hey," I said softly. She looked up, her eyes defensive. "What?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small card with the address of the diner where Cora worked. "If you're looking for a place to think, go here. Ask for Cora. Tell her Jade sent you. And remember," I leaned in, my voice firm, "don't let them make you feel small just because they're afraid of how big you can be." The girl took the card, a flicker of hope crossing her face. "Thank you." I smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached my eyes, and stepped onto the train. I found a seat by the window and watched the Chicago skyline begin to recede. I saw the tall buildings where my father used to command respect, and the distant suburbs where I used to feel like a ghost. I opened my notebook and flipped to the last page. I looked at the list of names I had written in the dark of Union Station. Leo, Arthur, Eleanor, Sarah. I took a pen and with a steady hand drew a final, definitive line through all of them. I closed the book and put it in my bag. I wasn't Jade Sterling, the victim. I wasn't Jade Sterling, the whistleblower. I was just Jade. And for the first time in my life, that was more than enough. As the train picked up speed, heading toward a horizon I had built for myself, I leaned my head against the cool glass. The sun was breaking through the gray clouds, reflecting off the lake. I was 18. I was free, and my suitcase was finally truly unpacked. After hearing Jade's story, the takeaway is simple. Never judge someone based on one-sided rumors. It's heartbreaking when people choose appearances over the truth, especially within a family. If you're ever in Jade's shoes, don't let the world break your spirit. Don't let someone else's lies define who you are. Just keep your head up and focus on building your own future.